My name is Grace, and I'm 32 years old. For 7 years, I believed my husband when he said I was too emotional, too paranoid, too broken to trust my own instincts. He was a successful lawyer, charming and confident, while I managed donor relations at a small nonprofit, the kind of job he introduced with an apologetic shrug at dinner parties. But the day I received those divorce papers claiming I was mentally unstable, something inside me finally cracked open. What he didn't expect was that the quiet wife he'd spent years diminishing would become the one person who could dismantle everything he'd built. The moment the judge said, "One more witness," and I saw the color drain from his face, I knew our story was about to change forever. Comment where you are watching from today, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories about resilience, truth, and second chances. It's strange how easily lies can wear a wedding ring. I learned that on a Sunday morning in April, surrounded by crystal champagne flutes and the artificial laughter of women who'd perfected the art of pretending their marriages weren't quietly dying. The charity brunch at the Westfield Country Club was Daniel's idea, of course. He always did enjoy a stage. I smoothed the cream silk of my dress and smiled at Mrs. Henderson as she droned on about her son's acceptance to Yale. Across the table, Daniel's thumbs moved rapidly across his phone screen, hidden just below the white tablecloth. When I leaned closer to whisper that we should mingle, he flinched so violently his water glass trembled. "Work emergency," he said, not meeting my eyes. His jaw was tight, that muscle near his ear jumping the way it did when he was lying. I'd learned to catalog these things over 7 years of marriage, the small betrayals that came before the large ones. Rachel caught my eye from across the room. My best friend since college, she had a radar for bullshit that Daniel had never managed to charm his way past. She tilted her head toward the exit, a silent question. "Are you okay?" I smiled and nodded, because that's what you do when your life is crumbling and you're not ready to admit it. Later, as we stood by the dessert table, Rachel touched my elbow. "Grace." Her voice was careful, the kind of careful that meant she'd seen something I wouldn't want to know. His cuff. I looked. Lipstick. A shade of coral I'd never worn, smeared just above Daniel's watch face. "It's probably from greeting someone," I heard myself say. The words tasted like ash. "You know how people are at these things." Rachel's expression said everything her mouth didn't. But I wasn't ready.
Not yet.
So I excused myself to the bathroom and stood in front of the mirror, hands gripping the marble counter, breathing through the tightness in my chest that felt like drowning on dry land. That night, I tried to salvage something. I made his favorite dinner, pan-seared salmon with that lemon butter sauce he always praised. I wore the navy dress he'd once said made my eyes look like the ocean. I poured wine and lit candles and pretended we were the people we'd been when we still touched each other without flinching. Daniel barely looked up from his phone. "I'm not really hungry. You haven't eaten all day. You keeping track of me now?" His tone was ice, but there was something underneath it. Contempt. When had contempt replaced love? I noticed his briefcase then, leather and expensive, hanging open by the door. A hotel receipt peeked from the inside pocket. The Grandview Inn. 3 nights last week when he'd claimed to be at a conference in Boston. My hand moved before my brain could stop it. I pulled out the receipt. "Grace, what the hell? The Grandview is 20 minutes from here." My voice surprised me with its steadiness. "You weren't in Boston." Daniel stood, his chair scraping against hardwood. For a moment he looked caught. Then something shifted in his expression, something calculated sliding into place. He laughed, actually laughed. "You've always been too emotional, Grace. Too paranoid. Maybe that's why we're here." "Where are we, Daniel?" He picked up his wedding ring from where it sat next to his plate, when had he taken it off, and placed it deliberately on the kitchen counter. The small metallic sound echoed like a gunshot. "We're done," he said. Then he walked out, leaving me standing in candlelight with a dinner growing cold and a marriage that had already decomposed. The days after blurred together, like watercolors left in the rain. I went through the motions, watered the plants on the windowsill even though they'd turned brown weeks ago, showed up to work at the nonprofit where I managed donor relations, smiled when people asked how I was. The house echoed with memories that felt increasingly like lies. Had he been texting her when we picked out this couch? Had he been planning his exit when we painted the bedroom that soft gray he claimed to love? I stopped eating. Food required an appetite, and I'd lost mine somewhere between denial and acceptance. On Thursday, a knock interrupted the silence I'd been drowning in. A process server, young and apologetic, handed me an envelope that felt heavier than paper should. Divorce papers. Daniel was suing me for half the house my grandmother had left me, the house I'd owned before we married. He was also claiming I was emotionally unstable, a danger to myself, unfit to make sound decisions. I read the petition 3 times before the words stopped swimming. Then I called Rachel, and she called a lawyer. Clara Weiss's office was all glass and steel, sharp lines and sharper intellect. She was maybe 50, with silver hair cut in a precise bob and eyes that missed nothing. When I finished explaining, stumbling through the story between tears I couldn't quite control, she leaned back in her chair and steepled her fingers. He's not just divorcing you, Grace. He's setting you up. What do you mean? This claim of instability. It's strategic. If he can prove you're unfit, he can argue the prenup you signed was under duress or diminished capacity. He wants the house, and he's building a narrative that lets him take it. Something cold settled in my stomach. Can he do that? He can try. Clara's smile was thin and sharp as a blade. But we're going to stop him. You have more power than you think. We'll fight this. I wanted to say no. I wanted to settle quietly, sign whatever needed signing, and disappear into the life of someone who didn't have to see Daniel's face ever again. But Clara leaned forward, her gaze intent. Don't, she said, reading my hesitation. Don't let him rewrite you into his villain. Don't let him win by making you too tired to fight. I left her office with a retainer agreement and something I hadn't felt in weeks, a small, fragile ember of defiance. That night, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. The message was simple. You're not the only one he lied to. I stared at the screen until my vision blurred. Who was this? What did they know? I texted back. Who are you? No response. But something in me shifted. The ember caught, and I felt the first real heat of anger burn through the fog of grief. Clara's office became my second home. We met twice that first week, mapping out a strategy like generals planning a siege. She needed evidence of Daniel's infidelity, proof of his financial manipulation, anything that would counter his narrative of me as the unstable, paranoid wife. We need to show the court who he really is, Clara explained, spreading documents across her glass desk. Not the charming lawyer everyone sees. The man who lies. I brought her everything I could find, bank statements, credit card bills, those hotel receipts. But it was the transfers that made Clara's eyebrows rise. Thousands of dollars, moved monthly to an account I didn't recognize. Do you know who this belongs to? She asked. No idea. Then we find out. The answer came 3 days later when I did something I'd never imagined myself doing. I followed my husband. I told myself it was for evidence for the case, but really I just needed to see. Needed to confirm that the man I'd loved had truly become someone I didn't recognize. Daniel left his office at 7, his BMW weaving through downtown traffic to Marcello's, that upscale Italian restaurant where we'd celebrated our 5th anniversary. I parked across the street, hands shaking on the steering wheel, and watched him walk in. 5 minutes later, she arrived.
Vanessa Hale.
I knew her name because I'd seen it on emails Daniel sometimes left open, always dismissed as just a paralegal at the firm. She was younger than me by maybe a decade, blonde in that expensive way that requires monthly maintenance, wearing a red dress that probably cost more than my car payment. I watched them through the window. Watched Daniel touch her hand across the table. Watched him lean in close, that smile on his face, the one I used to think was mine alone. I should have left. Should have driven home and let Clara handle it professionally. Instead, I walked in. The hostess tried to seat me, but I moved past her, drawn by some magnetic pull of self-destruction. I stopped at their table. Daniel looked up, and for one beautiful second, fear flashed across his face. Then Vanessa laughed. "Oh my God," she said, her voice loud enough to turn heads. "You're her. You're the wife." "I'm still his wife," I said, hating how small my voice sounded. "Legally, maybe." She swirled her wine, amused. "But some of us know how to keep a man interested. You might want to take notes." Daniel said nothing. Didn't defend me, didn't apologize, didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. He just sighed, like I was a child interrupting adult conversation. "Grace, go home. You're embarrassing yourself." I left. What else could I do? But the humiliation followed me like a shadow, wrapped itself around my throat until I could barely breathe. I made it to my car before the tears came, hot and angry and helpless. That night, I destroyed the wedding photo that hung in her hallway, smashed the frame against the wall, glass scattering across hardwood like tiny stars. Then I sat among the wreckage and let myself break. My phone buzzed. The unknown number again. "Check your email. You need to see this." The video attachment took forever to load. When it finally played, I recognized Daniel's voice immediately, recognized the bedroom in the background. Our bedroom, the one with the soft gray walls. "I love you," he was saying to someone off camera. "You're everything I've been missing." The same words, the exact same vows he'd whispered to me 7 years ago at our wedding. I watched him recycle our promises like they were lines in a script, delivered with identical sincerity to a different actress. I played it twice more before the nausea hit. When I showed Clara the next morning, she was quiet for a long time. "Where did this come from?" "I don't know. Someone keeps texting me." "Grace, if this person is sending you insider information, especially video from Daniel's bedroom, they're either very close to him or they're breaking multiple laws to help you." Does it matter? If it helps the case. It matters if we can't authenticate it. It matters if this is someone from his firm, someone with access to confidential information. Clara's expression was grave. Someone inside wants him destroyed. We need to know why. Another message arrived that afternoon. "You're not ready to know who I am, but I have what you need." Attached were bank records. Not just Daniel's account, but hidden ones. Offshore accounts, shell corporations, money moving through channels that looked designed to disappear. Clara examined them with the intensity of a surgeon studying X-rays. This is sophisticated fraud. Money laundering, possibly. These accounts are connected to his firm, but they're structured to hide the beneficial owner. Which is Daniel? Which is likely Daniel, yes. But proving it requires forensic accounting and subpoena power. She looked up at me. "Grace, you need to prepare yourself. If we pursue this, it's not just a divorce anymore. This could destroy his career, possibly lead to criminal charges." "Good," I said and meant it. The rage was clean and bright now, burning away the last remnants of the woman who'd apologized for suspecting her husband of texting at brunch. We filed a counterclaim the following week. Not just for divorce, but for fraud and coercion. The court agreed to a hearing. I felt powerful for maybe 6 hours. Then I left the courthouse and saw him. A man in a dark coat standing across the street, perfectly still in the rush of pedestrian traffic. He was watching me. When our eyes met, he didn't look away. I knew, somehow, that he was behind the text, the mysterious ally who'd handed me weapons I didn't know how to use. I crossed the street, dodging cars, my heart pounding. But by the time I reached the other side, he'd vanished into the crowd like smoke. That night, Rachel came over with wine and Thai food I couldn't eat. "You look like hell," she said affectionately, unpacking containers on my kitchen counter. "I feel like I'm going insane. Someone's helping me, but I don't know who or why. Daniel's stealing money. His mistress mocked me in public. And I have to stand up in court and pretend I'm the stable one." Rachel poured wine into 2 glasses. "You are the stable one. You're the one who isn't committing fraud or sleeping with employees." I followed him to a restaurant and confronted his mistress like a character in a bad movie. "You're human. You're allowed to be messy when someone's tearing your life apart." She pushed a glass toward me. "Besides, messy isn't the same as unstable. Messy means you're still fighting." I drank, letting the wine burn its way down. What if I can't win? What if the court believes him? Then we get louder. Rachel clinked her glass against mine. We bring receipts. We bring bank records. We bring whoever the hell is texting you. And we make sure everyone knows exactly who Daniel Hale really is. The hearing was set for 3 weeks out. Clara spent that time building our case like an architect designing a fortress. Every document cataloged, every witness interviewed, every hole in Daniel's story mapped and marked. I spent it learning to be angry instead of sad. The courtroom smelled like old wood and anxiety. I'd been inside for testimony prep, but walking in on the actual day, with the gallery filling behind me, the judge's bench looming ahead, Daniel already seated with his lawyer and Vanessa flanking him like bodyguards, felt like stepping off a cliff. Daniel looked confident. More than confident. He looked victorious, like the trial was a formality before his inevitable win. He wore a charcoal suit I'd helped him pick out 2 Christmases ago, his hair perfectly styled, his expression appropriately solemn. Playing the part of wounded husband with Oscar-worthy commitment. Vanessa whispered something in his ear. He smiled. My hands were shaking. I'd worn navy. Clara's suggestion, something strong and professional, but I felt like a child playing dress-up in adult clothes. What was I doing here? Daniel was a lawyer, for God's sake. He knew how to work a room, how to make people believe anything. And me? I managed donor relations for a nonprofit. I wrote thank you notes and organized fundraisers. I wasn't built for war. Clara's hand touched my shoulder. Let him underestimate you, she whispered. It's better that way. I nodded and took my seat. Judge Martha Brennan entered with the kind of authority that made the room snap to attention. She was maybe 60, with steel-gray hair and eyes that suggested she'd heard every lie humanity had to offer and wasn't interested in hearing new ones. Court is now in session. Hale versus Hale. She glanced at both tables. This is a preliminary hearing to address the divorce petition and counterclaims. We'll hear testimony from both parties and any supporting witnesses. Mr. Benson, you may begin. Carl Benson, Daniel's attorney, was everything I'd expected. Expensive suit, shark smile, voice smooth as poisoned honey. He stood and painted Daniel as a man trapped in an impossible situation, a devoted husband who'd tried everything to save his marriage, only to watch his wife spiral into paranoia and instability. Mr. Hale will testify that his wife became increasingly erratic over the past year, Benson said, pacing before the judge. Accusations without evidence. Surveillance of his movements. Emotional outbursts that left him fearing for his own safety. I wanted to laugh. Or scream. Maybe both. Daniel feared for his safety. The man who'd walked out on me without a backward glance, who'd left his wedding ring on the counter like pocket change. Then Daniel took the stand. He was good. I had to give him that. He spoke with just the right mixture of sadness and concern, like a man mourning a loved one's decline. He described incidents I barely recognized, fights that had been quiet conversations, concerns I'd voiced that became obsessive accusations, normal questions about his whereabouts twisted into paranoid surveillance. I tried to get her help, Daniel said, his voice thick with what sounded like genuine emotion. Suggested therapy, offered to go together. But she refused. Said I was the one who needed fixing. It wasn't like that. We'd gone to therapy twice, and he'd spent both sessions charming the therapist while dismissing every concern I raised. And the hotel receipts your wife mentioned? Benson asked. Work trips. All documented with my firm. I can provide itineraries, expense reports, colleague confirmations. Daniel's voice was steady. Grace saw what she wanted to see. She'd convinced herself I was unfaithful, and no amount of evidence to the contrary would change her mind. The gallery murmured sympathetically. I felt sick. Then Vanessa took the stand. She was wearing a modest gray suit today, her makeup subtle, her demeanor professional. Nothing like the woman who'd mocked me at Marcello's. She played the role of concerned colleague perfectly. Grace showed up at the restaurant where Mr. Hale and I were having a work dinner, Vanessa said, her voice trembling just slightly. She was aggressive. Accusatory. I was honestly frightened. Did she threaten you? Benson asked. Not explicitly, but her tone, her presence, it felt threatening. I worried she might become violent. I gripped the edge of my chair. Clara's hand found mine under the table, a silent reminder to stay calm. Stay composed. Don't give them the reaction they're baiting for. The judge looked skeptical, at least. Her pen moved across her notepad, but her expression revealed nothing. Ms. Weiss, your witness, Judge Brennan said. Clara stood with the kind of calm that made me believe, for the first time, that we might actually survive this. Ms. Hale, Clara said, emphasizing the shared last name with delicate precision, you testified that you and Mr. Hale were having a work dinner. What was the nature of that work? We were discussing case files. I'm a paralegal at his firm. I see. And this work dinner required physical contact. Clara produced a photograph, one I hadn't seen before. Daniel's hand covering Vanessa's across the table. This doesn't look like a business meeting. Vanessa's composure flickered. Colleagues can be friendly. Indeed. And do you consider yourself particularly friendly with Mr. Hale? A pause. Too long. We're professional. Professional colleagues who share bank accounts? Clara produced another document. These are transfers from Mr. Hale's personal account to yours. Thousands of dollars over the past 18 months. What were these payments for? Objection. Benson cut in. Relevance. Your Honor, the opposing counsel has painted my client as paranoid for suspecting infidelity. I'm establishing that her suspicions were not only justified but understated. Judge Brennan nodded. Overruled. Ms. Hale, please answer the question. Vanessa looked at Daniel. Something passed between them, a silent conversation I couldn't decode. They were loans. Personal loans. 18 months of loans, never repaid, to a woman your client claims is merely a work colleague. Clara's smile was sharp. Convenient. The recess came like a reprieve. I stood in the hallway, dizzy with adrenaline and nausea, while Rachel brought me water I couldn't drink. You're doing great, she said. Clara's destroying them. It doesn't feel like it. Daniel looks innocent. He looks practiced, Rachel corrected. There's a difference. My phone buzzed. The unknown number. Check your bag. Use it today. I looked down. My purse sat at my feet where I'd left it. I opened it slowly and found a USB drive I definitely hadn't put there. Black and unremarkable except for a single piece of tape on its side with 3 words written in neat print. Hale Hearts Charity. My heart stopped. That was Daniel's charity, the nonprofit he'd founded 3 years ago supposedly to help underprivileged kids get legal representation. He hosted galas for it, posted about it on social media, used it to polish his public image. I found Clara immediately. We ducked into an empty conference room, and she plugged the drive into her laptop. Video files, dozens of them. Bank transfers showing money flowing into Hale Hearts, and then immediately out again, into those same offshore accounts from the earlier documents. This is fraud, Clara breathed. This is massive fraud. He's been using the charity as a shell to move money. Can we use this? If we can authenticate it, yes. But Grace, we don't know who gave this to you. We don't know if it's admissible. It's real, though. You can see it's real. That's not how courts work. But Clara was already copying files, her fingers flying over keys. We'll need to subpoena the bank records, trace the source. This changes everything. This isn't just divorce anymore. Court reconvened. Clara stood before the judge, choosing her words carefully. Your Honor, new evidence has come to light regarding Mr. Hale's financial dealings. I'd like to request a continuance to properly authenticate these materials and potentially add fraud charges to our counterclaim. Benson was on his feet immediately. Objection. This is clearly a stall tactic. These are bank records showing systematic transfer of charitable donations into private offshore accounts, Clara interrupted. If Mr. Benson believes investigating potential money laundering is a stall tactic, perhaps he should reconsider his client's interests. Judge Brennan's expression sharpened. Approach. They went to the bench, voices low. I watched Daniel's face across the aisle. His confidence had finally cracked, just slightly. A muscle jumped in his jaw. Vanessa had gone pale. The judge made her decision. I'm granting a 2-day continuance for authentication of materials. Ms. Weiss, if you cannot establish chain of custody by Thursday, this evidence will be excluded. Court adjourned. As the gallery emptied, Daniel caught my eye. You're making a mistake, Grace, he said quietly. You have no idea what you're messing with. I know exactly what I'm messing with, I said. I'm messing with the truth. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of testimony, every flicker of expression on Daniel's face. My phone sat on the nightstand, silent. Then, at 2:47 a.m., it rang. The unknown number. Hello. Check the court filings. A man's voice, careful and low. Your husband's lawyer submitted falsified statements. Therapy records that don't exist. Who are you? Someone who waited too long to stop him. The voice was familiar somehow, like something half-remembered from a dream. You're doing the right thing. Keep fighting. The line went dead. I found the court filing online. Medical records from Dr. Patricia Mills, our former couples therapist, stating she diagnosed me with paranoid personality disorder and recommended immediate psychological intervention. I'd seen Dr. Mills twice. 2 sessions, both of which Daniel had dominated with charm while she'd nodded sympathetically at his concerns. I'd never been diagnosed with anything. She'd barely spoken to me alone. I forwarded everything to Clara with shaking hands, then did something reckless. I drove to Daniel's office at 3 in the morning, parked across the street, and watched the lights on the 14th floor. His office was dark, but I sat there anyway, imagining him inside, imagining the panic that must be setting in now that his perfect plan was unraveling. At dawn, I went home and showered and dressed for war. When I walked into the courthouse Thursday morning, Daniel was already there, and for the first time since this started, he looked genuinely worried. But he still managed to smirk when he saw me. After today, she's gone for good, I heard him whisper to Vanessa. The judge took her seat. Clara stood, her expression calm but her eyes blazing with something that looked like victory. Your Honor, we're ready to proceed. We've authenticated the financial documents and have additional testimony regarding the falsified therapy records. We're also prepared to call our witness regarding Mr. Hale's fraudulent charitable organization. Benson shifted uncomfortably. Your Honor, we weren't notified of any additional witnesses. You were notified of our right to call witnesses, Clara said smoothly. This witness came forward only yesterday after learning the nature of these proceedings. Judge Brennan looked between them. Who is this witness? Ethan Cross, Your Honor. Mr. Hale's former business partner. Daniel's smirk vanished instantly. His face went white, then red, then white again. He leaned toward Benson, whispering frantically. Vanessa's hand fell away from his arm. The judge glanced at her notes. Mr. Cross. Yes, I see he's been subpoenaed. She looked up, her gaze steady. Counselor, you mentioned one more witness? Yes, Your Honor. We call Ethan Cross. The courtroom was packed the next morning. Somehow word had spread, maybe through the legal gossip network, maybe through Clara's strategic whispers to the right journalists, that the Hale divorce was becoming something bigger than a domestic dispute. I spotted 2 reporters in the back row, notebooks ready. Daniel wore confidence like armor again, but I'd learned to read the tells. The way he kept touching his watch, the rigid set of his shoulders. The fact that he'd barely spoken to Vanessa, who sat 2 chairs away instead of at his elbow. Judge Brennan called the court to order. Before we hear from Mr. Cross, I want to address the matter of the disputed therapy records. Dr. Mills, you're under oath. Dr. Patricia Mills looked exactly as I remembered, soft-featured, professionally sympathetic, the kind of therapist who probably had inspirational posters about mindfulness in her office. She twisted her hands in her lap. Dr. Mills, Clara began, you submitted records to this court stating you diagnosed Mrs. Hale with paranoid personality disorder after extensive treatment. Is that correct?
Yes.
I mean, Dr. Mills glanced at Daniel's table. I provided my clinical assessment. And how many sessions did you have with Mrs. Hale alone, without Mr. Hale present? A pause. Too long. Couples therapy is typically conducted jointly. That's not what I asked. How many sessions alone with Mrs. Hale? One, I believe. Or possibly none. The focus was on the couple's dynamic. Clara produced a calendar. According to Mrs. Hale's records and her own calendar, she attended exactly 2 sessions with you, both with Mr. Hale present. Each session lasted approximately 45 minutes. Is that sufficient time to diagnose a complex personality disorder? Well, clinical judgment. Is it sufficient time, Dr. Mills? Not typically, no. And yet you provided this diagnosis to the court. Clara's voice hardened. Dr. Mills, did Mr. Hale or his attorney compensate you for these records? Benson shot up. Objection. This is an attack on Your Honor. I have bank records showing a payment of $7,000 from Mr. Hale to Dr. Mills 3 days before these records were filed. Clara placed the documents before the judge. This is witness tampering. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Brennan's gavel cracked like thunder. Order. Dr. Mills, did you receive payment from the defendant? Dr. Mills had gone the color of old newspaper. He said it was for back payments, sessions we'd had that insurance didn't cover. Mrs. Hale's insurance covered all sessions, Clara said calmly. There were no outstanding payments. You accepted $7,000 to fabricate a diagnosis. I watched the doctor crumble, watched her try to salvage something from the wreckage of her credibility. She stammered about clinical judgment and good faith, but the damage was done. Even Benson had stopped objecting, his face carefully neutral in that way lawyers have when their case is imploding. Judge Brennan's expression could have frozen fire. Dr. Mills, I'm referring this matter to the medical board. You're excused, and your testimony is stricken from the record. As the doctor fled, I felt something loosen in my chest. That label, paranoid, unstable, unfit, had been wrapped around my neck like a noose. Now it was gone. But the relief was temporary, because Clara was standing again. Your Honor, our next witness is critical to establishing the full scope of Mr. Hale's fraudulent activities. However, we've received information suggesting there may be attempts to intimidate this witness. What kind of attempts? Yesterday evening, Mr. Cross's vehicle was vandalized in the courthouse parking garage. 2 unidentified men approached him. Security intervened, but the implication was clear. My stomach dropped. I hadn't known about this. Clara had kept it from me, probably to keep me from panicking. Daniel leaned toward Benson, his whisper harsh enough that I caught fragments. Told you, under control, shouldn't have. Judge Brennan's voice cut through the murmurs. Mr. Benson, does your client know anything about this incident? Absolutely not, Your Honor. These allegations are baseless. Then you won't object to a protective order for Mr. Cross during his testimony? Of course not. But Daniel's face told a different story. Whatever control he thought he had was slipping, and he knew it. We broke for lunch. Rachel met me in the hallway with coffee I didn't want and a sandwich I couldn't eat.
You're winning, she said.
Do you see that? You're actually winning. It doesn't feel like winning. It feels like drowning slightly slower than yesterday. That's still progress. She squeezed my hand. Grace, I'm proud of you. I know it doesn't feel like much right now, but you're standing up. You're fighting back. The woman who let him walk out 6 weeks ago wouldn't recognize you. Maybe she was right. I barely recognized myself. This person who could sit across from the man she'd loved and watch him lie under oath, who could hear herself described as paranoid and unstable without crumbling, who could accept mysterious USB drives from anonymous allies and turn them into weapons. Clara found us before the afternoon session. I need to tell you something about Ethan Cross. My heart skipped. Is he okay?
He's fine.
But he's asked to meet with you before he testifies. Privately. Why? He says you deserve to know who he is before you hear what he has to say. Clara's expression was unreadable. Grace, Ethan is the person who's been sending you information. The anonymous texts, the USB drives, it's all him. The courthouse had a small attorney conference room on the 3rd floor. That's where I met him. Ethan Cross was maybe 40, with dark hair going silver at the temples and a thin scar along his jaw that looked old and well-healed. His eyes were tired in a way that suggested he'd stopped sleeping well years ago. "Mrs. Hale," he said, standing when I entered. "Thank you for agreeing to see me. You're the one who's been helping me." It wasn't a question. Yes. Why? He gestured to the chairs, and we sat. For a long moment, he just looked at me, like he was trying to decide how much truth I could handle. "I was Daniel's business partner 8 years ago," Ethan said finally. "We had a small investment firm. Nothing glamorous, but successful. We were friends. Or I thought we were." "What happened?" "Daniel found a way to make more money. Faster money. He created shell companies, moved client funds through accounts I didn't know existed, skimmed profits and fees without reporting them. When I found out, he blamed it all on me. My hands had gone cold. He framed you." "Perfectly. He'd been careful to put my name on the accounts, my signature on the documents. When the SEC came knocking, I was the one who took the fall. I spent 2 years in federal prison for fraud I didn't commit while Daniel walked away with a clean record and a thriving law career. Oh my God. I got out 3 years ago. I've been rebuilding, working as a consultant trying to move on. But I've also been watching him, waiting for him to cross a line he couldn't talk his way out of." Ethan's smile was bitter. "Looks like he finally did." "The charity," I said. "Halehirts." "Among other things. He's been running the same scheme, just more sophisticated. Funneling money through nonprofits, hiding assets offshore, building an empire on fraud." He leaned forward. "I've been collecting evidence for 2 years. Bank statements, transfer records, emails. Everything I'd need to prove what he did to me and what he's still doing." "Why not go to the police?" "Because I'm a convicted felon, Mrs. Hale. My testimony alone wouldn't be enough. I needed him to expose himself, needed someone with standing and credibility to bring him down." His expression softened. "When I heard about your divorce, I knew this was my chance. But I had to wait until you chose to fight. People who are forced to fight rarely tell the truth as clearly as people who decide to." I felt dizzy. This man had spent years in prison for Daniel's crimes, had lost everything while my husband built a life on stolen credibility. And now he was here, risking whatever peace he'd managed to find, to help me. "I'm sorry," I said.
"For what happened to you?"
"Don't be sorry. Help me finish it." He stood, offering his hand. "Tomorrow, I'm going to tell the court everything. Daniel will try to destroy my credibility, the conviction, the grudge, all of it. But I have documentation he can't dispute. And with your case adding legitimacy, we can finally put him where he belongs." I shook his hand. His grip was steady, certain. "Thank you, Ethan. Thank me after we win." That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about Ethan in prison, paying for Daniel's crimes. About Vanessa, promised everything and given lies. About the doctor who'd sold her integrity for $7,000. About all the people Daniel had used and discarded like they were tools instead of human beings. And I thought about myself, the woman who'd watered dead plants and apologized for suspecting her husband's betrayal. She felt like someone I'd known in another lifetime. Rachel stayed over, sleeping in the guest room in case I needed her. Around 3 a.m., my phone buzzed. I expected Ethan's number or Clara's, but it was Vanessa.
"I'm sorry."
"For all of it. He promised me the world." I stared at the message for a long time before typing back. He promises everyone the world. Then he takes everything. Her response came immediately. I know that now. Too late. I wanted to hate her. God knows I tried. But sitting there in the dark, reading her words, all I felt was tired. Tired of Daniel's wake of destruction. Tired of women being turned against each other while he walked away unscathed. "It's not too late to tell the truth," I sent back. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. Then appeared again. Finally, I'm scared. Me too. But I'm doing it anyway. No response after that. I set the phone down and watched the shadows on the ceiling until dawn crept through the blinds. Court reconvened at 9 sharp. The gallery was fuller than before, I recognized some of Daniel's colleagues from the firm, their faces carefully neutral. The reporters had multiplied to 4. Daniel looked composed, but I could see the cracks now. The way his jaw was set too tight. The way his eyes kept darting to the door like he was calculating escape routes. Judge Brennan surveyed the courtroom with the expression of someone preparing for a long day. Ms. Weiss, call your witness. Clara stood. The petitioner calls Ethan Cross. The doors opened and Ethan walked in. He moved with quiet confidence, his suit simple and well-fitted, his scarred face impassive. He didn't look at Daniel as he passed, but I saw Daniel flinch anyway. Ethan was sworn in and took the seat. Clara approached with a yellow legal pad, but I had the sense she didn't really need notes. She knew this story by heart because she'd spent weeks corroborating every detail. Mr. Cross, what is your relationship to Daniel Hale? Former business partner. Former friend. Ethan's voice was steady, matter of fact. Former fall guy. A ripple went through the gallery. Judge Brennan leaned forward slightly. Can you elaborate on that last part? 8 years ago, Daniel and I ran an investment firm together, Cross Hale Financial. We managed portfolios for about 30 clients, mostly small businesses and individuals planning for retirement. It was legitimate work, steady income. Ethan paused. Then Daniel found a way to make more. What did he do? He created a network of shell companies, fake businesses with real bank accounts. He'd move client money through these accounts, skimming percentages, charging fees that never appeared on official statements, hiding profits from the IRS. It was sophisticated fraud, the kind that takes planning and practice. Clara produced a document. Is this one of those shell companies? Ethan examined it.
Yes.
Crossroads Consulting LLC. Never had employees, never provided services, existed only to receive and transfer money. Daniel created it using my personal information, my social security number, my signature. Without your knowledge? Without my knowledge. He had access to all our partnership documents. It was easy for him to forge what he needed. Ethan's expression hardened. When the SEC investigated, every trail led to me. My name on the accounts, my signature on the transfers. Daniel had been careful to keep himself at arm's length. What happened? I was convicted of securities fraud and sentenced to 2 years in federal prison. Daniel testified against me at trial. Said he'd suspected something was wrong but didn't have proof until investigators arrived. Painted himself as the shocked, betrayed partner. Ethan looked directly at Daniel for the first time. He was very convincing. Benson was on his feet. Objection, Your Honor. This is ancient history and completely irrelevant to the current case. I'm about to connect it, Clara said calmly. Mr. Cross, after your release, did you continue to monitor Mr. Hale's activities?
Yes.
I wanted to understand how he'd done it, how he'd built a fraud complex enough to fool investigators. And I wanted to know if he'd stopped or if he was still doing it. And what did you discover? That he'd refined his technique. Ethan's voice remained level, but something flickered in his eyes. Old anger, carefully controlled. He'd moved from private investment fraud to nonprofit fraud. Specifically, an organization called Hale Hearts. Clara pulled up a projected image, the charity's logo, clean and professional, with Daniel's smiling face on the homepage. What is Hale Hearts purported to do? Provide free legal representation to underprivileged youth. Noble cause. Great PR for a lawyer building his reputation. Ethan gestured to the screen. In reality, it's a sophisticated money laundering operation. The courtroom erupted. Judge Brennan's gavel came down hard. Order. Benson was practically shouting his objections, but the judge silenced him with a look. Mr. Cross, these are serious allegations. What evidence supports them? Bank records, Your Honor. Transfer logs. Emails between Mr. Hale and offshore account managers. Ethan nodded to Clara, who produced a thick binder. Donations come into Hale Hearts from legitimate sources, galas, corporate sponsors, individual donors. Within days, sometimes hours, that money is transferred to accounts in the Cayman Islands, Luxembourg, Switzerland. The charity's actual operating budget is minimal. Most of the money disappears. Clara handed copies to the judge and Benson. I watched Daniel's attorney flip through pages, his face growing more ashen with each one. These documents, Clara said, show a pattern remarkably similar to what Mr. Cross was convicted of 8 years ago. The same account structures, the same transfer timing, even some of the same shell company names, just slightly modified. Objection. Benson was desperate now. These documents' chain of custody is questionable. We don't know where they came from. They came from me, Ethan said. I've been collecting them for 2 years. I have timestamps, authentication from forensic accountants, and matching records I've subpoenaed from the banks themselves. Everything is documented. Judge Brennan examined the binder, her expression growing darker with each page. Mr. Benson, I'm going to allow this testimony. If you believe the evidence is improperly obtained, you can challenge it, but I want to hear what Mr. Cross has to say. Ethan continued, methodical and precise, walking the court through the web of fraud Daniel had built. Every shell company, every transfer, every fake invoice and fabricated expense report. It was dizzying in its complexity, the kind of scheme that required intelligence and planning and absolute contempt for anyone stupid enough to trust you. And you sent this information to Mrs. Hale, Clara said. I did. Anonymously at first because I wanted to be sure she'd fight. People who have evidence forced on them rarely use it effectively. But when she hired you and filed a counterclaim, I knew she was serious. So, I provided everything I had. Why help her? Why not take this information to the authorities yourself? Ethan's smile was thin and sad. Because I'm a convicted felon, Ms. Weiss. My testimony alone wouldn't be enough to overcome Daniel's reputation. But Mrs. Hale, she's credible, sympathetic, and she is standing to challenge him in court. With her case, my evidence becomes legitimate. He turned to look at me then, and I saw the weight he'd carried for years. The injustice, the rage, the patient determination to make things right. Besides, Ethan added quietly, he was doing to her exactly what he did to me, framing her as unstable to cover his own crimes. I couldn't let that happen again. Clara let that sit for a moment before continuing. Mr. Cross, do you have proof that Mr. Hale intentionally framed you 8 years ago? I do now. I didn't have it then, that's why I was convicted. But in the documents I collected about Hale Hartz, I found emails between Daniel and his current attorney, Carl Benson, discussing the original case. Ethan's voice went cold. In one email from 3 years ago, Daniel writes, we used the same playbook with Cross. Pin it on someone expendable, maintain deniability, walk away clean. It's cleaner the second time around. The courtroom went silent. Even the reporters stopped scribbling. Benson looked like he'd been struck. He stood slowly, his composure finally shattered. Your Honor, I had no knowledge, I've never seen that email. But you were mentioned in it, Clara said. Which means either you were complicit or your client committed malpractice by concealing it from you. Either way, it's not a good look, Mr. Benson. Judge Brennan removed her glasses and rubbed her eyes. When she spoke, her voice was tired and angry. We're going to take a 30-minute recess. Mr. Benson, I suggest you have a very serious conversation with your client. Ms. Weiss, Mr. Cross, you'll remain available for cross-examination. As the judge left, chaos broke out. Daniel grabbed Benson's arm, his whispers urgent and harsh. Vanessa stood and walked out without a word, her face blank. The reporters surged forward, trying to get comments. Clara guided Ethan and me to a side room. My hands were shaking. Is it enough? I asked. Is it enough to win? It's enough to destroy him, Clara said. Criminal charges are coming. The Bar Association will investigate. His firm will distance itself. Everything he's built is collapsing. Ethan sat heavily in a chair. I waited 8 years for this. Doesn't feel the way I thought it would. How does it feel? I asked.
Hollow.
Justified.
Sad.
He looked up at me. Mostly sad. For all the time wasted. All the lives he damaged. At least it's over now. It's not over yet, Clara warned. Daniel's going to fight. He'll try to discredit Ethan, challenge the evidence, maybe even try to flee. The next few hours are critical. She was right. When court reconvened, Benson came out swinging. He attacked Ethan's credibility, the prison time, the obvious grudge, the years spent obsessing over Daniel. He questioned the legality of how the documents were obtained. He argued that coincidental account structures weren't proof of wrongdoing. But Ethan weathered it all with the calm of someone who'd prepared for every attack. He had answers for everything: timestamps proving the documents came from legitimate subpoenas, expert testimony confirming the handwriting on key emails, bank officials ready to testify about suspicious activity. And then Vanessa walked back into the courtroom. She moved to the witness stand like someone walking to their own execution. Her makeup had been cried off, her composure gone. When she was sworn in, her hand shook. "Ms. Hale," Judge Brennan said gently, "did you ask to testify?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Proceed." Vanessa took a breath. Everything Daniel told me was a lie. The charity was fake. The offshore accounts were real. He told me Grace was the problem, that she was unstable and vindictive and trying to ruin him. But she was just, her voice broke. She was just trying to survive what he did to her. Daniel shot to his feet. "Vanessa, don't." "Sit down, Mr. Hale." Judge Brennan's voice cracked like a whip. Vanessa continued, tears streaming now. "He gave me money to testify against Grace. To say she stalked me, threatened me, was mentally unfit. None of it was true. And when I asked too many questions about where the money came from, he told me I'd go to prison too, if I didn't cooperate." Clara approached with a box of tissues. "Did he threaten you directly?" "He said if I betrayed him, he'd make sure I took the fall. Just like he did to Ethan. Just like he tried to do to Grace." Vanessa looked at me, her face crumbling. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I thought, God, I'm so sorry." I didn't have words. Part of me wanted to forgive her. Part of me wanted to hate her forever. Mostly, I just felt exhausted. The judge called another recess. This time, when we emerged, 2 men in dark suits were waiting in the hallway. "Federal agents," Clara whispered. Someone, probably Ethan, had already contacted the FBI. They spoke quietly with the judge in her chambers. When court reconvened, Judge Brennan's expression was granite. "Based on today's testimony, I'm issuing preliminary findings. Mr. Hale's petition for divorce is denied pending criminal investigation. Mrs. Hale's counterclaims regarding fraud and coercion are substantiated. I'm issuing a protective order prohibiting Mr. Hale from contacting Mrs. Hale or any witnesses in this case." She paused, looking directly at Daniel. "Mr. Hale, I'm also ordering you to surrender your passport and remain within county limits pending further legal proceedings. Federal authorities have expressed interest in several matters discussed today." Daniel's face had gone gray. For the first time since this started, he looked genuinely afraid. "Court is adjourned. We'll reconvene in 2 weeks for final disposition of the divorce matter, though I suspect circumstances will have changed significantly by then." As the gavel fell, I felt something shift in my chest. Not quite victory. It was too soon for that, and the wounds were too raw. But something like freedom, like the first breath after drowning. Rachel grabbed my hand. Clara allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. And Ethan nodded once, an acknowledgement between soldiers who'd survived the same war. Outside, reporters shouted questions. I ignored them all. I had nothing to say that mattered to anyone but myself. Daniel had built a life on lies and manipulation, and today it had finally caught up with him. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: criminal trials, civil suits, the long process of actually healing from what he'd done. But tonight, I was free of him. Free of his smirk, his control, his carefully constructed narrative about who I was supposed to be. I climbed into Rachel's car and let out a breath I'd been holding for months. "Where to?" she asked.
"Home," I said.
My home. And for the first time in years, I meant it. The morning air felt different. Charged somehow, like the atmosphere before a storm breaks. I sat in the courtroom watching Daniel lean close to Vanessa, his lips moving in what I assumed was reassurance. "After today, she's gone for good," he mouthed, his smirk sharp as a blade. Judge Brennan settled into her seat and glanced at Clara. "Counselor, you mentioned one more witness?" Clara stood, smooth and certain. "Yes, Your Honor. We call Ethan Cross." Daniel's smirk didn't just fade, it shattered. The color drained from his face, so fast I thought he might faint. Vanessa grabbed his sleeve, but he jerked away, his eyes locked on the double doors as they swung open. Ethan Cross walked in like judgment personified. Maybe 40, with dark hair silvering at the temples and a faint scar cutting across his jaw. He carried a leather folder and wore composure like armor. He didn't look at Daniel as he passed, but Daniel couldn't look away. When Ethan was sworn in and seated, Clara approached with measured steps. "Mr. Cross, what is your relationship to Daniel Hale?" Ethan's voice was steady, almost gentle in its certainty. "Former partner. Former friend. Former fall guy." The courtroom went silent. Even the reporters stopped scribbling. Clara nodded. "Please explain." And Ethan did. He explained how Daniel had built a fraud scheme 8 years ago using shell companies and offshore accounts. How he'd put Ethan's name on everything, forged signatures, created a perfect scapegoat. How Ethan had spent 2 years in federal prison for crimes Daniel committed. "He testified against me at my trial," Ethan said, his voice never wavering. "Called me his friend who'd betrayed him. He was very convincing." Then came the evidence. Ethan opened that leather folder and produced document after document, offshore transfer ledgers with bank seals, showing money funneling through Hale Hearts, Daniel's supposed charity. The same patterns, the same account structures, just refined over time. "This charity," Ethan said, tapping the papers, "exists to launder money. Donations come in, get transferred to the Cayman Islands within hours. The actual operations budget is minimal. Most of it disappears." Clara displayed emails on the courtroom screen. I watched Daniel's face as his own words appeared, planning to frame me as unstable. One line made my stomach turn. "We'll get her declared unfit. She breaks easy." Then Ethan played an audio clip. Daniel's voice, crystal clear. "Once she's out, move the rest to Belize. You'll get your cut." Vanessa's face went blank. She pulled her hand from Daniel's arm and stared straight ahead like she'd stopped seeing him entirely. "That's edited," Daniel whispered, but his voice cracked. Judge Brennan held up a hand. "Mr. Cross, how did you obtain these materials?" "I've been collecting them for 2 years, Your Honor. Bank records, authenticated emails, transfer logs. Everything has been verified by forensic accountants. I can provide their reports and chain of custody documentation." Carl Benson, Daniel's attorney, launched into cross-examination with the desperation of a drowning man. He attacked Ethan's credibility, his prison record, his obvious grudge. But Ethan had answers for everything: dates, amounts, wire confirmations, even a notarized affidavit from a Belizean bank officer. During recess, Ethan found me in the hallway. His expression was softer than it had been on the stand. "I was the one texting you," he said. "The anonymous ally. I waited until you chose to fight because people who are forced rarely tell the truth as clearly as people who decide to." "Thank you," I managed. "For waiting. For helping. Thank me after we win." He offered a small smile. "We're close, Grace. Very close." When court reconvened, Clara stood before the judge with quiet authority. "Your Honor, based on today's testimony, the petitioner's claims of Mrs. Hale's instability were strategic defamation designed to facilitate fraud." Judge Brennan looked at Daniel with an expression that could freeze fire. "I'm starting to see that, Ms. Weiss." That afternoon, Carl Benson fought like a cornered animal. He petitioned to suppress Ethan's materials, claiming they violated non-disclosure agreements and privacy laws. He argued chain of custody was questionable. He painted Ethan as an obsessed ex-convict with an axe to grind. But Clara had anticipated every move. She produced the protective order she'd filed the night before and provided detailed documentation of how every piece of evidence had been obtained legally through subpoenas and public records requests. The judge ordered a brief evidentiary hearing and placed Ethan under temporary court protection. It was the right call. After court, as Rachel and I walked toward the parking garage, we heard a car alarm shrieking. Ethan stood by his vehicle, 2 men in dark clothes approaching from both sides. Rachel already had her phone out, dialing 911, while I shouted for security. The men scattered when uniforms arrived, but the damage was done. Ethan's tires were slashed, his windshield cracked. He was unharmed but shaken. "Daniel's getting desperate," Clara said when we regrouped in her office. "Desperate people make mistakes." The mistakes kept coming. That night, my phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. "I want out."
Can we talk?
We met the next morning in a coffee shop 2 blocks from the courthouse. Vanessa looked like she hadn't slept in days, her makeup unable to hide the exhaustion. "He told me I'd take the fall if things went wrong," she said, her voice hollow. "Said I was an accomplice now, that I'd go to prison too unless I kept lying for him." "What do you want to do about it?" "I want to testify. I want to tell the truth." She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "I know you have no reason to believe me, but I didn't know about the fraud. I thought the charity was real. I thought you were crazy." The word tasted bitter. "Unstable? Paranoid?" "Yes." She didn't look away.
I'm sorry, Grace.
"For all of it." I didn't forgive her. Not yet, maybe not ever. But I believed her fear. Clara met with Vanessa that afternoon and laid out the terms: full cooperation, complete testimony, restitution of any money she'd received. In exchange, the DA might offer immunity. "Truth buys leniency," Clara told her. "Not absolution. You'll have to live with what you did." Meanwhile, the evidence kept mounting. Clara discovered that Daniel had bribed our old couples therapist, Dr. Mills, to write a retroactive note about my supposed paranoid delusions. Ethan provided the payment screenshot, $7,000, transferred 3 days before the note was submitted to court. I spent that evening recording a statement for court. Not the tearful, emotional plea Daniel probably expected, but a clear, methodical map of coercive control. How he'd isolated me from friends, cut off my access to bank accounts, made me apologize for things I didn't do, convinced me I was the problem. "He didn't just cheat," I said to the camera. "He built a cage." And then he told me I was crazy for noticing the bars. The next blow came from Rachel. She'd been reviewing old doorbell footage from my house and found something extraordinary. Daniel, 3 weeks earlier, creeping onto my porch at 2 in the morning, trying to use a spare key to get inside. Time-stamped during the exact period when he claimed to fear for his safety around me. The narrative was flipping so fast, even I could barely track it. Then, at 2:17 a.m. on the 4th morning of trial, a bank alert triggered. Daniel had attempted to transfer $4.3 million from one of his hidden accounts to an overseas location. The bank, acting on Clara's emergency hold order, froze the transaction immediately. Clara filed an emergency motion before dawn, adding attempted asset flight and witness intimidation to the record. Judge Brennan set an accelerated hearing for that morning. I barely slept, but when I walked into court, I felt clear-headed for the first time in months. Daniel looked haggard, his confidence finally eroded into visible panic. Day 4 of trial felt like watching an execution, slow and methodical and inevitable. Vanessa took the stand first, her voice shaking so badly the court reporter had to ask her to repeat herself twice. She admitted to the affair, admitted to receiving payments from Daniel, admitted he'd coached her testimony against me. "He told me Grace was unstable," Vanessa said, tears streaming, "that she was trying to ruin him out of spite. He showed me texts he said were threatening, but now I think he wrote them himself." Clara approached with Vanessa's phone, already admitted into evidence. "Are these the text messages you're referring to?"
Yes.
He'd screenshot conversations and send them to me, showing how crazy she was. But I never saw the actual message threads from her phone, just his screenshots. "Because he fabricated them," Clara said. Not a question.
Yes.
"I think so. Yes." Next came Dr. Mills, the therapist. She tried to maintain her professional dignity, but it crumbled fast under Clara's questioning. Yes, she'd accepted payment from Daniel. Yes, she'd written the diagnosis without ever seeing me alone. Yes, she understood that violated every ethical guideline in her profession. By the time she left the stand, she was crying. A court-appointed digital forensics examiner testified that Ethan's audio recordings were unedited and authentic. The chain of custody held. The documents were real. Everything Daniel had dismissed as fabrication or revenge was being confirmed, piece by piece, by neutral experts. Then Clara called Daniel back to the stand. He started smooth, deflecting and explaining, his lawyer voice in full effect. But when Clara asked, "Mr. Hale, where were you at 2:17 this morning?" he faltered. At home. Sleeping." "Interesting." Clara produced the bank alert. "Because at 2:17 a.m., someone using your credentials attempted to transfer $4.3 million to an account in Belize. The same account mentioned in Mr. Cross's testimony. Were you sleepwalking?" Daniel's composure shattered. "You had no right to freeze my accounts." "The court had every right, Mr. Hale. Those assets are marital property pending investigation." You're twisting everything. Grace is the one." He jabbed a finger at me across the courtroom. "You ruined me. You were supposed to love me, support me, and instead you." Judge Brennan's gavel cracked like thunder. "Mr. Hale, control yourself." But Daniel was beyond control. 7 years of carefully constructed lies were collapsing, and he couldn't hold the pieces together anymore. "She wouldn't have anything without me. That house was nothing before I. That house was mine," I said quietly. The courtroom went silent. "My grandmother left it to me. You just convinced me I couldn't manage it alone." Daniel's face went red, then white. He slumped in the witness chair, finally out of words. A district attorney who'd been observing the proceedings requested a sidebar. When they finished, Judge Brennan announced that the DA's office would be opening a criminal investigation into fraud, money laundering, and witness intimidation. Clara had one final piece of evidence, a handwritten note from Daniel to Carl Benson, discovered in office shredders and painstakingly reconstructed. "Make her sign. Or break her." Carl Benson looked like he wanted to disappear. His client had just imploded, his own reputation was in tatters, and now there was proof he'd known about coercive tactics. Finally, it was my turn. I stood before the court and delivered the statement I'd rehearsed 100 times, but somehow still felt raw and unrehearsed. "I believed silence kept peace," I said. "That if I was quiet enough, accommodating enough, things would get better. But silence didn't keep peace. It kept him powerful. Today, I choose my voice back. I choose my name back. I choose my life back." The gallery was silent when I finished. Judge Brennan nodded slowly, then addressed the courtroom. "Based on the testimony presented, I'm making a preliminary ruling. Mr. Hale's credibility is catastrophically compromised. All claims regarding Mrs. Hale's instability are stricken from the record. We'll proceed to financial judgment and protective orders." The DA offered Vanessa conditional immunity in exchange for full cooperation and restitution. She accepted, nodding through tears. As court adjourned, I felt something that wasn't quite victory, but wasn't defeat either. Maybe it was just the beginning of healing. The final ruling came 2 weeks later. I'd spent the interim in a strange limbo, staying with Rachel, avoiding reporters, trying to remember what normal felt like. When Judge Brennan read her decision, her voice was firm and clear. The marital home was mine. The liquid assets Daniel had tried to hide were mine. Compensatory damages for emotional distress and fraud were mine. The money that had flowed through Hale Hearts was being seized and rerouted to legitimate charities. A long-term protective order was issued. The court referred Daniel's conduct to the Bar Association and the State Attorney General. The DA formally opened criminal proceedings. As the gallery emptied, 2 plainclothes officers approached Daniel with quiet, practiced words. He didn't fight. He just looked at me one last time and spat. "You'll miss me." "I already grieved," I said. And I meant it. I'd grieved the man I thought I'd married. The real Daniel had never been someone worth missing. In the hallway, Vanessa caught my arm. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "for everything. Tell the whole truth from now on," I said. "Then make a different life." She nodded and walked away, shoulders bent like she was carrying weight she'd never be able to fully set down. Clara and I had coffee that afternoon in a quiet cafe with good light and better pastries I still couldn't quite eat. I need to tell you something, Clara said. Years ago, I clerked at Daniel's firm. I was just a junior attorney, barely noticed, but I saw him bully witnesses, manipulate evidence, gaslight opponents. I couldn't prove anything then. Couldn't stop him. Is that why you took my case?
Partly.
Mostly because you deserve someone who'd fight as hard as he did. She squeezed my hand across the table. This time, we drew the line.
Thank you, I said.
For drawing it with me. Ethan met me outside the courthouse the next day, his leather folder tucked under his arm. He looked lighter somehow, like he'd set down a burden he'd carried for years. Keep this until the criminal trial, he said, handing me the folder. You might need it. I can never thank you enough. You already did. His smile was small but genuine. I owed the truth a debt. Now it's paid. He walked into the sunshine and disappeared into the crowd, and I had the sense I might never see him again. Maybe that was okay. Maybe some allies were only meant for one battle. Rachel helped me move back into my house, finally and completely mine. We opened every window, letting fresh air sweep through rooms that had felt suffocated for years. I took down the photos of Daniel and me, replacing them with pictures of sunrise and Rachel laughing and the river where I'd learned to breathe again. The dead plants from the windowsill went into the trash. I replaced them with living things, basil and rosemary and a small jade plant that the nursery owner promised was nearly indestructible. Things grow when they aren't afraid, I told Rachel as we arranged them on the sill. She laughed through tears. Put that on a mug. Over the following months, Clara and I started working with a local nonprofit that helped people document coercive control. We taught workshops on gathering evidence, understanding financial fraud, recognizing manipulation. It turned out my story wasn't unique. It was just finally told. A paper trail is a map out of the woods, I'd say at the beginning of each session. And I'd watch faces light up with recognition, with hope, with the understanding that they weren't crazy or weak or broken. Just trapped and learning to open the door. 6 months after the trial, on a morning when the air smelled like rain and possibility, I walked along the river in my navy coat, the same color I'd worn into court, the same color I'd worn when I decided to fight back. I took a deep breath, held it, released it, felt my lungs expand fully for the first time in years. The past would always be there, scars and memories and lessons learned the hard way. But the future was mine now. Mine to choose, mine to build, mine to live without looking over my shoulder for the man who'd tried to convince me I was too broken to stand alone. I whispered to myself, to the river, to the life stretching ahead. When the door opened, it wasn't just a witness. It was the life I'm choosing. And then I walked forward into it. When someone tries to rewrite your story to make themselves the hero, do you stay silent to keep the peace? Or do you fight to reclaim your truth, even when it costs you everything you thought you wanted? If this story resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe for more tales about finding your voice when the world tries to silence you.